Thanks, everyone, for sending in messages to us already today. This is a hot button issue, so pick up your phone, please. Give us a call live, 204-780-0893. The Federal Competition Bureau is looking into Canada's domestic air travel industry. Why? Because of the long list it's seen of customer complaints. It wants input from Canadians and their ideas and opinions on how to improve the market. Guess what? So do we. Join our call-in conversation. I know you have something to say about air travel in this country. 204-780-0893. John Graddick certainly has something to say. He's a lecturer and the coordinator of the Aviation Management Program at McGill University. Thank you so much for joining us by Zoom today.
My pleasure, Janet.
So how often do you hear complaints about the airline industry?
Not a day goes by without hearing from somebody about an incident, about a disruption. And people are asking, what's happened to Canadian aviation that we've got to this point? And they're asking, what do we do about it? And do you know anybody who can handle this? Without going through all of the rigmarole associated with the CTA.
CTA.
The Canadian Transportation Agency.
Okay.
That's the agency that's got the responsibility to handle complaints that people have and unresolved claims for compensation. And there's 72,000 people sitting in that lineup, and some of that stuff has been hanging out for 2 years. So we're slowly going through it, but the operative word is slow.
Now, what about you, Manitoba? Have you ever had something happen with an airline that you feel you should have filed a complaint about, or perhaps you have? The number to call, 204-780-0893. Share your stories. Our toll-free number is 1-800-268-5483. We're going to go now to a call we received this morning on our listener line. This is Liz.
I'm a fairly frequent flyer, and it's really a no-brainer in terms of how the airlines need to improve. Hire enough crews so there's no delay, be on time, and make sure that the aircraft is well serviced with food and fuel and so on, so there's no delay at the gate, and offer masks or make masks mandatory. I've talked to a number of people who have flown lately, and they've all been sick, including myself. So get it together, aircraft people. And I certainly enjoy flying, but it's really getting to be more and more of a pain. And we'd also like to be able to speak to somebody, a human being, when we call the airlines, both WestJet and Air Canada. That would be really nice. Thanks very much. Bye.
That's Liz, who phoned in earlier today to leave a message on our listener line. Remember, you can do that anytime, too. Right now, we'd like you to call in 204-780-0893. Our guest today is John Graddick, an aviation expert joining us from McGill University. So what did you think of the stuff that Liz had to say there? All the things that she'd like to see changed.
Yeah, that's a huge list, Liz. And I think that, I think you've hit a button on it. You hit the nail on the head when you talk about all of the faults that we've seen happen in the industry over the last few years. I'm not sure whether this competition market study is going to address the extent of those issues that you talked about. I think that the market study is really trying to understand competition and how does competition work in Canada within the aviation industry. How can we look at another carrier go bankrupt like we did back in February with Lynx going out of business. We've gone through that story number of times. And I think that the government's saying, okay, enough of that. What is it that we have to fundamentally change in the way in which we allow competition to operate? And how do we ensure that the existing carriers don't take it onto themselves to try to get these guys out of business, which is what I think has been happening.
You think that's been happening? I was just going to ask you about all the smaller airlines. It seems like we had these discount carriers, and Canadians were kind of feeling like they could get, the cheap flights that they always hear about happening in Europe and out of Toronto, and suddenly we could get some of them in Manitoba as well. But then they all seem to go away one by one. What happened?
Oh, it's a question of the duopoly we have in Canada, Air Canada and WestJet. seem to be, very much in control of either market access or in terms of pricing. They'll let these little guys, these new guys show up, and they'll leave them alone for a year and a half, and then they go after them and they take whatever commercial action that they think is required in order to protect their own market. So as these little guys grow, they tend to be much more aggressive when it comes to pricing, and you get a reaction from Air Canada, get a reaction from WestJet, and they're not going to let their 90% share of market disappear or even dwindle, and they'll go after these guys very aggressively, and eventually they run out of cash.
We've got a caller joining us now. Grace, thank you for reaching out to Radio Noon. How are you today?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
I'm thrilled that you called.
I love to hear your voice.
Oh, I like to hear yours too, so you should call more often. What do you have to share with us today?
This isn't anything new, but I'm like a vacation traveler because I'm retired, but I can't get over the number of people that take carry-on luggage to a huge advantage with the airlines. So they have a carry-on piece of luggage, and then they have a backpack that's probably about 3 or 4 inches long, but when they turn, they could bonk you in the head if you're sitting. And then they might also have a few other bags. And so the backpack and the bags are supposed to go under the seat in front of you, but that doesn't happen. So everything gets put in the overhead bins, and they're cram-packed, and often we're ready to take off, and the poor flight attendants are looking for a spot to put somebody's carry-on luggage. And the last time I traveled, Air Canada was offering free put your luggage or book your luggage, whatever you say, and you don't have to pay.
Even at the desk. I mean, that has got to be. I've seen that too, and I've wondered. I mean,
everybody ignored them except an older person like myself, and she said, "Really, for free?" And I mean, everybody else was oblivious to really what they're doing.
So, John, what do you think that's about? I mean, clearly, the airline started charging for checking a bag, and people didn't want to pay it.
Yeah, and the airlines kept losing bags. If you don't have to go back too far, I think in the summer of 2022, I think, is when we had these massive collection of bags at major airports in Canada. Bags are missing connections and not being able to get on flights and stuff. So, you have 50 or 60,000 bags sitting at Toronto Airport, and those bags don't belong in Toronto. They belong throughout the whole Air Canada network. So, people were saying, well, wait a second, the odds of me getting my bag when I check it, are slim to none. So guess what? I'm going to start carrying my stuff on board. And that, phenomenon, kind of disrupted the whole carry-on baggage environment. Now you put the onus on the gate agents to check the size of the bag. They get pretty frustrated, and they get into arguments about, your bag's 1 inch too big and you can't fit it in under your seat. What do you do?
It seems
and
like
so the agents basically have, for the most part, they've given up. They've given up on it, and they just let everything go. So it gets to be a real mess. And so the first people on board the airplane take up, the space in the overhead bins, and by the time you get 2/3 of the airplane loaded, there's no more bin space left. And now you're in trouble. Now what do you do? And so it gets to be a real mess of taking bags off the airplane and having them checked for free. So it's not a very pleasant experience. And I think that somehow, in some way, the airlines they're trying. I think our friends at WestJet introduced a new fare last week, or going to be introducing in the next couple of weeks, where you get a low fare. The one condition about that low fare is you have no carry-on bags. No carry-on bags. And the only thing you can bring on board is something that fits under your seat. Nothing to go in the overhead bin. If it doesn't fit under your seat, sorry, you can't take it with you on the airplane. So the airlines are trying to reduce the amount of carry-on bags that consume overhead bin space by giving people a break on the fares. But it's going to be a question of policing. Who's going to police the bags you bring onto the airplane? Our flight attendant's going to stop you at the door if they see a bag that's not going to fit? And the answer is probably they'll do it once or twice, but the frustration and the yelling and screaming that's going to happen as a result of that is not going to make that experience very, very pleasant. So,
and of
it's
course,
gonna be a mess.
they don't deserve to be abused at work, right? And they sometimes face just the
Yeah.
worst of us because we're also frustrated by long waits or whatever the problem is. I know a lot of these questions could be answered probably by price, right? Our number to call, 204-780-0893. What about what we're saying rings true with you? What have you seen? If you live outside the perimeter, want the toll-free number, 1-800-268-5483. Share your stories and calls. Complaints, Canadians always worry, or you look at your airfare. I'm from Nova Scotia. To fly to Nova Scotia, I could easily go to Europe, probably twice, for often what I could what it'll cost me to fly home to see people in Nova Scotia. You know, we've got high airfares. Are you willing to pay more for better service? These are some of the questions, I guess, that we have to consider, and then we'd love to hear from you. We've got a caller, John, joining us. Rosemary, hi. Thanks for calling
Hello?
Radio Noon. Hello, it's Janet Stewart. How are you doing?
Fine, fine.
What would you like to contribute to our conversation today?
So it seems like you're blaming the big players in the industry for being evil corporations that are putting these small players that are they're trying to restore competition to the system. The problem with the system is that there's competition. The problem is that it's privatized. And so, of course, every corporation, the big ones and the small ones, are trying to make a profit. So that's why we have all these cutbacks, all these things where the airlines are trying to save money or make money or top up their bottom line. What should happen is that the whole industry should be nationalized. It's kind of like an infrastructure thing or a healthcare where you're providing service to human beings. It should be nationalized, and then you wouldn't have these problems. It would be much more efficiency in it, and all these complaints could be eliminated or centrally dealt with in a way that's responsible to the public.
So, Rosemary, you sound like you've got a business background thinking like this. If we nationalized an airline or two airlines, would you want? I guess we'd just have one.
Yeah,
yeah,
one.
Just
one.
One.
Like it used to be with Via Rail. We used to have Air Canada. Used to be a national. It used to be publicly owned. We should go back to that model.
So you'd be willing to have tax dollars go to support an airline industry?
Willing to have what? Sorry?
Would you be willing as a taxpayer then, if we're nationalizing it and we want, you're absolutely right. I believe that a lot of the issues that we're having, the problems, are because the airlines are trying to find ways to cut costs, right? So they don't have their own people handling baggage anymore. Everybody is, am I correct on that, John? That so a lot, suddenly there's another player involved and everybody's trying to keep prices low, and that means lower price staff, fewer benefits, all that. Jump in here, John. Help me with my sentence.
No, I appreciate the caller's concern. I think that, Canada's aviation world came out of that environment where she's talking about nationalization. I'm a firm believer that air transportation is a basic human right in Canada. We need transportation to get anywhere in Canada. We don't have a rail system that's comparable to move people from Winnipeg to Toronto or Winnipeg to Vancouver. We don't. And we're going to go by road 2 days later. We don't have an alternative to aviation in Canada. So to me, without an aviation industry, without a viable, sustainable aviation industry, we don't have a country, period. And so it's my belief that, aviation is required, absolutely required to keep this country together. But the problem is that, your listeners, very, very, very astute, is that, competition in Canada has been defined back in 1988 in the aviation industry as being deregulated. Let the market decide, not the regulator, not the legislator, not the government. Let the market decide who survives and who fails. Let the market decide the price that we're going to be charging passengers to go from point A to point B. And that's been around since 1988. And for the most part, it works to a certain degree. But it doesn't work when you have concentration of power, a concentration of market power. It's the same as in grocery shopping. You know the Loblaws, you know the story we've had with grocery pricing, and you only have 3 or 4 grocery chains in Canada. Well, guess what? You only got 2 major airlines in Canada. So if you think you had market power in grocery chains, you got more market power, more concentration in the airline business, and that leads to some questionable behavior. And that's what I think the Competition Bureau will be looking at.
Lynn, thanks for calling Radio Noon.
Hi there.
Hi. What comment?
Yes,
How would you?
I'm sure.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sure I'm probably echoing what may have been said already, but my frustration has just been I fly reasonably frequently, and the number of times that flights have been delayed is just unacceptable in my books. And what we're always told is that it's because the flight attendants and the pilots need their sleep because of a previous flight they've been on. It's required that they have a certain number of hours before the next flight. But it just seems extremely frustrating if an organization cannot organize the roster in such a way that it doesn't impact flights and passengers that are just waiting and waiting until enough staff can show up so that we can get on the next flight and get things moving. I just feel that that's a real disorganization, and I think there should be airlines should be compensating passengers if they had to financially compensate people for this disorganization. I think it would motivate them to step up to the plate and be organized like any proper organization should be. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you so much for calling. John, let's talk about that, because there's a couple of different things at play that I can think of. One being that the airlines have cut things so to the bone that the first thing that goes wrong, it just causes a trickle-down effect. And also, then if you can blame it on a safety issue, you don't have to pay compensation.
Yeah, those are the rules. That if it's safety related and it's, you can't fly the airplane with one less pilot, can't fly the airplane with one less flight attendant. So staff is a requirement to fly the airplane safely from point A to point B. And I agree with your caller. I think the airlines have gotten to the point where they've overcommitted the schedule that they're presenting to the traveling public. They've sold the flights. They've sold seats on airplanes that they know they're not going to be able to operate on time because there's too many airplanes that are being committed for the staff levels that they have. And that's, we've been harping about that since the revenge travel started back in 2022, that the airlines are basically putting a lot of traffic out there, a lot of planes, a lot of schedules that they know they're going to have a hard time operating on time. And the airlines don't really care about on-time performance as far as I'm concerned. When the president of Air Canada says that 70% on-time performance is acceptable to him.
70%.
70% on time.
So and one in 3 of us can expect to be totally messed up in our travel plans, and that's okay.
But that's
or 3 in 10, I should say. That's a more accurate fraction.
So the question is that, but that's coming from the airlines. I'm saying, wait a second, there's something wrong with this picture here. And so there has to be some motivation given to the airlines in Canada, at least that, you gotta pick up the game and get to, plan your resources accordingly.
Which brings us back to the Competition Bureau looking for people's stories, just like we're looking for today. They want to know what's been going on for you, and they're gathering comments until June 17th. John Graddick, what kind of teeth does the Competition Bureau have to actually make change?
None.
None at all.
None. This is all about recommendations that the Competition Bureau will in fact put in play to talk about what are changes that different departments, other agencies, other ministries who have responsibility for administering regulations and legislation affecting airlines. So they'll make recommendations to Transport Canada. They'll make recommendations to Industry Affairs. They'll make recommendations to Global Affairs Canada. They'll make, but they have no teeth. The only thing they have teeth into, if they find evidence of predatory pricing, if they find evidence of collusion, if they find evidence of bait and switch, then they have teeth. But that's very, very specific instances. In a general study such as this one, it is really very, very much empirical, and they're just going to make recommendations.
So in 60 seconds or less, what do you think needs to happen, John?
I think we're going to have about 10 issues that Canadians are going to prioritize between now and the 17th of June. Basically, let the Competition Bureau dive in, figure out what the problem is, how big of a problem is it, and what is it that Canadians think should be done about it. And I think it's going to be a public sounding. It's going to be a massive survey that they're doing of Canadians, and they're going to shop for ideas for how to fix it. And I think that's going to be the end result is saying, here are the top 10 issues. Let's go and fix these things and then make some recommendations about how to fix it.
And how optimistic are you that things will get better in the near future?
Unfortunately, I'm not holding my breath because this is a big issue. And this is all about politics, too.
Right.
This is all about politics. We've got an election year coming. We know we've got politicians who are posturing about aviation and the need for aviation. And, it all depends on the will of the government to really make changes in the middle of an election period. So I'm not sure it's going to happen very quickly.
John Graddick, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Jenna. Have a great day.
You too. John Graddick coordinates the Aviation Management Program at McGill University. Emily Brass is host